WTVJ 70 Years of Making a Difference is sponsored by FPL.
Just being a part of WTVJ, you are a part of history.
Everything built to this day is set on that foundation 70 years ago.
When you think of Miami, you think of WTVJ.
TVJ is the history of South Florida.
It's really a tradition of excellence, and it's something that I'm proud to be a part of.
Local news done the right way can truly become a family of the community.
We had it first, TVJ.
It is very important to understand what they're seeing happening today had a beginning 70 years ago.
Here in this building, Florida television began. WTVJ on March 21st, 1949, began broadcasting and became the first television station in Florida. The gentleman with me this evening was here that first night we began television. Mitchell Wolfson, president of Wometco Enterprises and WTVJ.
Colonel Wolfson went off to war. He left Miami Beach when he was the mayor of Miami Beach. When he came back, he said he learned that the Germans had an unbelievable communication network. So he came back from World War II as a colonel, and he wanted to be able to communicate more with Miami and the state of Florida and beyond. And television was just firing up.
It seemed to me that television had the greatest opportunity in which we could serve and profit from communication.
Colonel Wolfson, who was the owner, was really a hot TV person. He wanted to do everything he could do to expand television.
And his vision was to use this incredible technology to inform people, to empower people, and to inspire people, and to have a close connection to the community to be relevant.
He took risks. He took risks with the first movie theater when he started it during the Great Depression. So he returned from war and was taking another risk.
You know, the original building was the Capitol Theater. Wometco, of course, owned the Capitol Theater and the theaters in town. So they decided to close the theater and make it into a TV studio. We took over the whole theater and had a big control room and a tremendous studio.
It was 316 North Miami Avenue. They broadcast from 4 o'clock in the afternoon to 10 o'clock at night. And all it was feature films or kinescopes of shows that had run in New York 3 weeks before. It was kind of chaotic, no question about it. We didn't really know what we were doing. You'd walk up into your engineering department and you'd open up a rack, cables all over the place. Everything was done live, and I hate to tell you how many mistakes and errors were made.
When they signed on the air, no one could afford a television, and there wasn't much product on TV to watch anyway. My dad started putting free televisions in shop windows all along North Miami Avenue, Flagler.
And when the show came on, people would gather outside the store window and watch TV. And then, of course, as people bought more and more sets, the TV went on the air around the clock.
Tracy, what do you think of television?
Oh, I think it's wonderful. You know, I hardly ever watch radio anymore.
That night seems a long time ago, but I must admit, we didn't realize then the full impact this new medium would have on the community.
It almost bankrupted the family, I was told. For years, it really was a losing venture. Then it started to take hold, catch up in, I guess, the early 60s, and John Fitzgerald Kennedy's death, that it exploded.
We wondered where it would lead us when we started that first evening. I don't think any of us expected it to grow so fast.
Channel 4 at the time, now Channel 6, was the station.
WTVJ had been around since the beginning of time, or at least the beginning of television news. You know, it was sort of such an institution in the city.
It's the oldest station, it was the greatest station, it was the Walter Cronkite, it was the top of the heap.
Working at WTVJ, you worked with the people who began the industry in South Florida, and if not the entire state of Florida.
We all had one goal in mind, to make television go in this area. And we made it go. Believe you me, we made it go.
Get today's news today. From the Television News Center of the South, here's today's Florida News Picture.
Colonel Wolfson, I guarantee you, saw the future of daily and nightly editorials and broadcast news in Ralph Rennick.
He recruited the best people in the business to execute this vision. And of course, Ralph Rennick became iconic.
Police tonight are pushing a three-state search for two desperate criminals who escaped from Dade County's jail last night.
The word that most people use when they talk about Ralph Rennick is pioneer, because he invented television news.
Here at the Air Force Missile Test Center at Cape Canaveral, the Air Force is preparing to launch its second attempt to send a rocket to the moon.
Make no mistake about it, he built television in South Florida.
Zuby Chevrolet presents Ralph Rennick and the 11 o'clock news.
The Senate tonight has passed the right to vote measure in the Civil Rights Bill.
Young, good-looking, an unbelievable broadcasting deep voice, and drew the attention straight from you.
Ralph Rennick was God. He was the voice of it. Good evening. They has to have this theme. Ba, ba, bum, 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 bum.
The Ralph Rennick Report.
The timpani, boom, boom, boom. It was a big deal. I mean, at one point, Channel 4, WTVJ, had higher ratings than every other station combined in the market because Ralph Rennick was God.
You know, he was very imposing. I mean, he was like 6'4". And when he walked into the newsroom, conversation kind of stopped.
Ralph Rennick was super intimidating.
And he was scary. You know, you talk to Ralph, and you say, "Hi, Ralph." You go, "Well, hello, how are you?" You know, you kind of shake all over.
He was very demanding and a very, very good mentor and a terrific newscaster, kind of the gold standard for news directors and anchor people.
Ralph Rennick, at the time, who was for the next nearly 36 years the anchor and news director at WTVJ, was the first at any station in the country to go on with a nightly editorial.
No endorsement would be given any candidate for political office.
I believe that began in 1957, and that continued until his departure in 1985.
I believe his nightly editorials brought my father and the community closer together.
Colonel Wolfson and Ralph, they were always together, always talking about the city, the community, how to make Miami-Dade County a better place to live, work, and play.
He loved Rennick, and if you said anything negative, you were in deep trouble with Mr. Wolfson.
He was the first American journalist to interview Fidel Castro.
What is the relationship between you and Mr. Urrutia today? Who is making the decisions for Cuba?
Of course, Dr. Ruth. You can be sure I am not a strong man at all, and I don't want to be.
He was a tough boss. He drove his employees, but no less than he drove himself.
I remember my first story where I got to sit on the set with him, and I threw back to him, "Back to you, Ralph," and he just went. I don't even think he said my name, or maybe he at one point he might have said, "Catherine." You know, he was a little stuffy.
As a man, he was in the station as news director, aloof. You couldn't always talk to him like, you know, two guys just talking. Once he left this station, once he walked out the doors, he was a different person.
I used to try to make him laugh, and I would do some of the talent shows for the holiday parties, and Rennick, he had this really funny laugh.
Over the course of his career, Ralph interviewed 7 United States presidents. It was never totally clear who was granting whom an audience.
People are always always telling me, you know, about my father. They knew my father, how much they admire my father, and I'm constantly thanking them, you know, for remembering, because a lot of young people don't even know who he is now.
It is my decision, effective tonight, to step down as Vice President and News Director of WTVJ.
I don't think there's ever been a figure in South Florida, for sure, probably not many in the whole country, that had the command, that had the respect, that had the gravitas of Ralph Rennick. Ralph Rennick was the man.
I think he's probably looking down the fact that, you know, he has created a legacy and it's lasted this long. I think he'd be, or is, very happy.
Good night, and may the good news be yours. Now to Bob Weaver and the weather.
Well, Ralph, just as I forecast, a few brief, widely scattered, intermittent showers occurred today.
Bob Weaver, Bernie Rosen, and Ralph Rennick all came to WTVJ together in the late 40s. They were the Beatles, really, of TVJ.
Bob Weaver was probably as talented an individual as you want to meet. He could do anything.
Well, you know, my service to South Florida began just a few months after the station signed on.
Bob was here for more than 50 years. He was much more than just a weatherman, but he was the weatherman for South Florida.
I was privileged enough to have the opportunity to work with Bob Weaver when I started, so I really feel so connected to kind of that special time when you had some of the folks who had been here at the very beginning.
Rain or sunny, the Dolphins will emerge number 1.
He used to have this trick where he would write on this glass board, but it looked like he was writing backwards.
I worked with him, alongside him for more than 30 years. He got me through some very tough spots.
He was witty and knowledgeable, but when hurricanes hit, there was no one you turned to faster than you went to Bob Weaver.
We gave the public everything they needed, everything they had to have, and I found out the nice thing about it was that the people really appreciated it.
He was funny on air. You saw him. He was like a clown.
He started with Weavy the Weatherbird in the early 50s when Weavy was just a little tiny little bird with a spring.
He has grown up over the years.
Yes, he got bigger and bigger.
And a lot more colorful.
Right, and bigger. Well, that's the way it goes, right, Weavy?
Ah! I'm 45 years old today.
It was Bob Weaver's voice, of course, but it was something like, "Look, it's gonna be cloudy." It was crazy.
What's on your nose, Weavy?
It's my shamrock.
Weavy took on a whole life of his own.
It was nuts, but we had fun with it, and it was just an indication of who Bob was from the beginning to the end. I love the man. There was nothing that he wouldn't do for anybody.
People sometimes come up and say, "Oh, gee, a real-life celebrity." I never felt like that.
The boat's coming to take us back to the studio, and we'll see you later.
We want to welcome you to the Skipper Chuck Show.
Skipper Chuck were my first memories of 316 North Miami Avenue.
Who's that? Well, look who's here.
There wasn't very much programming back then, and when I was growing up, and Skipper Chuck was on every morning right before we went to school. There he was, Skipper Chuck and Popeye Playhouse.
Really? Yeah, in fact, I got the Hank Wig. How about $5,000? Hold this, please.
Chuck Zink and the Skipper Chuck Show is what I grew up watching.
I was on Skipper Chuck as a Cub Scout. I won the balloon drop.
It was fun, entertaining.
Every kid wanted to be on Skipper Chuck. This was the 1950s, and Miami, like so much of the South, was still segregated. Chuck Zink lost advertisers because he said he was going to have black children on his show.
My name is Ed Odell.
Chuck Zink took a liking to me. I actually majored in dramatics and speech. I had written children's plays in college, and he gave me an opportunity to be on the show.
I'll get the door. Admit, bro, I'll just get the door here.
There was an accident down the street.
There was?
Yes.
Oh, what happened?
4th Street ran into 2nd Avenue.
Chuck Zink was credited by the Cuban community as helping the Cuban community learn English.
Entonces cogemos los French fries que son deliciosos, son exquisitos, ¿no?
Every day they had a word of the day, Hispanics would learn that word of the day, and they got one more word in their vocabulary. Chuck Zink educated this community before there was a Sesame Street.
I get this feedback from those kids who are now growing up. I can't tell you the times that they will say, you know, you told me never to quit. You told me to straighten up and fly right. And I tried, and I did.
In many ways, WTVJ, since its inception, has been an experiment in greatness.
Just being a part of WTVJ in those days, you were a part of history.
WTVJ was a very diverse newsroom and very diverse company. Men, women, Black, Hispanic, and that was amazing back in the day.
Manolo Reyes, WTVJ, Channel 4.
They hired a man by the name of Manolo Reyes. And Manolo was the first, Spanish-speaking reporter.
Con su reporter, Manolo Reyes. Señoras y señores.
Trailblazer. Manolo Reyes is a trailblazer, just like TVJ is a trailblazer. But to have Spanish language news in an English language station was unheard of, criticized, I'm sure, but key to serving parts of our community.
Ralph hired the first African-American reporter, C.T. Taylor.
C.T. Taylor, Channel 4 News at Mime International Airport.
So there was a trend of hiring African-American reporters where there had been none around the nation. WTVJ was no different. They hired C.T. Taylor. They hired a great commodity from this community whom the Black community identified with and they respected. But unlike the rest of the country, they kept C.T. Taylor. And it showed just how forward-thinking WTVJ was. He was brought in, I believe, in 1968. There was a national phenomenon, riots that took place around the country. Suddenly, the stations realized they needed an African-American reporter.
Blacks made two strong demands during today's Community Relations Board meeting.
Well, CT came into WTVJ. He was already an icon in South Florida. CT not only covered the big news, but when CT went out into this community, people would give him a standing ovation because he was the first, he was the best at the time, and they knew him as one of their own. He was the one who kicked open the doors, and it was such an important time because you can't have a good story unless it's told from everyone's perspective.
This is C.T. Taylor reporting live from the Metro Justice Building.
Hold it! Hi. In basketball, that's what they call a held ball.
Jane Chastain was the first woman sports reporter in this country.
And in fact, when I came to WTVJ, there were no other women on the air.
Jane Chastain, Channel 4 News.
Bernie Rosen was the sports director at WTVJ for more years than I can count. Being very forward-thinking, he tried to find a woman to work in the sports department. They would not hire me full-time. And they told me that even though I'd done live shows, that I would not be allowed to go on the air live at WTVJ. It wouldn't be accepted, but I was allowed to do 3 sports features a week.
For most teenagers, turning 18 means the right to vote. But for tennis sensation Chris Everett, it's the right to go out and earn $1 million.
I was an experienced on-air person, but I really knew nothing about being a good reporter. I grew up as a reporter at WTVJ.
Are you satisfied, looking forward to another year with that group?
Oh, yeah. Well, I was a photographer for many years. That was difficult. Jane had a difficult time.
We would still get complaints at the station. People who were very incensed that I was a woman on the air and I belonged in the kitchen.
When she first started working, they wouldn't allow her in the press box at the Orange Bowl because she was a woman.
This was before the women were allowed to go in the locker room. So we would have to go in, get them, bring them out. And a lot of guys just said, no, I'm not doing that. George Wilson, who was the coach prior to Don Shula, absolutely refused to speak with her. Just would not even acknowledge who she was.
But near the end of the season, he came up to me one day at Dolphin Camp and he said, Jane, you're gonna be here tomorrow? And I said, yes. Well, I'll give you that interview. And I had no idea that the players even were paying attention to something like that. But as soon as the camera stopped rolling, they stopped what they were doing and they ran over and they carried me across the field and they threw me in the density dumpster. It was kind of their way of saying, okay, now you're one of us. It was really one of the happiest moments of my life, I think, because I had been accepted.
Jane always handled herself with class, with dignity, with integrity, and I think over time won all these people over because she was steadfast. She wasn't going to back down.
WTVJ became my family.
Every woman that's on the air now ought to thank Jane Chastain for paving the way.
I don't know if you can possibly appreciate what the people that came before you actually had to go through. But I have had a couple of the female sportscasters tell reporters that they'd like to buy me a beer. I don't drink, but I took that as a compliment.
Jane Chastain, Channel 4 Sports.
I got to work with the greatest staff in the history, I believe, in the history of sports for local news in this country. But the godfather was Bernie Rosen.
Bernie Rosen is one of the rocks that the station was built on. You've got Ralph Rennick, you got Bernie Rosen, you got Bob Weaver, you got Colonel Mitchell Wolfson. That is the Mount Rushmore of WTVJ.
My first job at the station was sweeping up the studio floor, but everyone knew my interest in sports.
He started sports coverage. He was the man behind everything.
I was appointed in 1960 as the sports director. I'd already been there over 10 years.
He just expected the best.
I can't tell you how hard I worked. I had a fixation. I was going to beat the Herald and the News to some stories.
He knew everybody, was an encyclopedia of knowledge, never forgot a phone number. It was incredible.
I mean, we covered every practice. We shot every practice. You know, you got to work out every day.
I beat them in 2, 3, 4, 5 stories. That made me so proud.
If it happened in Miami, he was going to know about it. He was going to know about it first, and he was going to send you out to get the story, and you better get it or there was hell to pay.
The thing I cherish most today is that the people that work for me are now my friends.
He retired, I believe, in 1985. I went to his retirement party. And he came back, I think he worked for another 30 years as a quote-unquote consultant.
I think he's 91 or 2 years old, still sharp as a tack. If it weren't for Bernie Rosen, I would not be where I am today. And I say that, and so can 35 or 40 other people.
This was a little Jewish kid from the Bronx of New York that made it. And I did everything within my power to make this thing work.
I am the greatest.
Part of Bernie's connection were the Dundee brothers, Chris and Angelo. Of course, Angelo was Ali's trainer.
We're talking about Muhammad Ali. He was then called Cassius Clay. We started covering him right at the beginning. When he came down here in 1960, he had just won the Olympic light heavyweight championship.
Chris owned the 5th Street gym where Ali trained, and we were always there.
I'll fight any man in the world. I'll beat any man in the world.
Angelo and I were very good friends, and we worked out a relationship. Whenever he saw us, we got interviews with him. It was great.
Bernie would send me daily to the 5th Street Gym to film Muhammad Ali's training sessions.
I'm shooting a Bell & Howell camera at the 5th Street Gym. This has got to be the 2nd or 3rd week I'm ever at Channel 4. And I had never seen Muhammad Ali in person. He was huge.
He was very quiet and subdued, always praying, but as soon as those camera lights came on, it was like Unbelievable.
Here, big man.
Well, let me finish. Let me talk. This boy's modest. I'm the greatest. He's not a talker. I'm going to fight Sonny Liston right after I annihilate Henry Cooper.
I'm the greatest. Can't nobody whoop me. Before Joe Frazier, I'm going to fight Joe Frazier. And Channel 4 is having it all.
You're going to float like a butterfly and sting like a bee. Ah, rumble, young man, rumble. Ah.
10.5 for Cassius Clay.
Clay is fighting Sonny Liston. No one thought Clay would last a round.
Everyone was set up in Sonny Liston's room. They thought that Liston would knock him out in 2 rounds.
I beat Liston like he was an amateur. Right. I held my hands low. Right. I leaned back. Right. I'm still pretty. He was the one all cut up. I shook up the world. Oh, I whooped him so bad. Wasn't that good? Oh, I shook up the world.
He won the championship, and I wish you would have seen the people scurrying to get into that interview room. And we were already set up in the interview room. He turns to me and he says, as soon as all this is over, please come into my dressing room. I'm going to give you a one-on-one interview. That's the kind of relationship we had.
And here he is, ladies and gentlemen, the new heavyweight champion of the world, Cassius Clay.
Who's the greatest?
He would make himself accessible to the TV station.
We knew each other better, and there was a lot of respect there.
So that's my next big fight. Mr. Tooth Decay, how are your teeth?
They're fine, they're fine.
The champ's in town, and he wants to look at the first Spinks fight. I had about 10 of Ali's fights in my desk drawer. 15 minutes later, he comes in, and he looked at the whole fight. And to have him sit there and just watch, it was a great thrill.
And I want to say one thing to the people out there, and all of Miami. Channel 4 made me great. That's why I stopped listening in 8.
This is 1964. Clay is fighting Liston. The Beatles are playing at the Deauville Hotel Theater, the Ed Sullivan Show. They meet together. The famous picture of Clay knocking out all the Beatles at the Fifth Street Gym, and Channel 4 was there. These perhaps are the 2 most iconic figures in media coverage. And by the way, when the Beatles came out to perform, who was the booth announcer for Ed Sullivan Show? Ralph Rennick.
Tonight live from Miami Beach, the Ed Sullivan Show.
Thank you, Ralph Rennick, for that very nice intro.
It's just all amazing to me. History right before our eyes. We had it first, TVJ.
I guess the next big watershed moment for the station was I did the very first live field report in 1975.
And we will switch live to the scene now with our live eye unit for this report from Bob Mayer.
There was an attempt made on Ronald Reagan's life. He was not president at the time. He was running for president. I was not sent out to do the station's first live shot. I was sent to cover the story. It was just another candidate, speaking, and they didn't have a photographer to send, so I went alone. The station decided this was the moment to roll out the live equipment. I'm surprised you couldn't see my heart pounding because no one had ever done that before.
His service to this station is just legendary, but he's one of those alumni who really helped to pave the way for this place being so well-renowned and recognized.
I went to work for WTVJ immediately out of college and basically spent most of my life here. My love was consumer reporting and consumer stories. The stories that I did involved helping people.
Dade health officials found another dirty restaurant today.
I think over the years, the most impactful thing that I did was a series called Not on the Menu, which we started in 1973. We were the first in the country to do this, where I would follow health inspectors in Dade and Broward and inspect restaurants for cleanliness. And the first year we did it, 62% of the restaurants in the 2 counties failed inspection. It was impactful because we got laws changed on both the local and state level. Health inspectors did not have the power to close dirty restaurants prior to that series, and they got it. Within 3 months of the start of that series, they got that power.
Now, here's Bob Mayer.
The other part of my career was anchoring, because I anchored for most of my 40 21 years here. My last 8 or 8.5 years here, I anchored with Pam Giganti.
He was just so giving and wonderful.
We were a TV couple.
I got to ride in one of your cars.
Oh, yes. No. We led a parade.
It was
we
a
led
public
parade.
event. Over that time, he taught me how to just be really comfortable in my own skin.
I hated getting up, but the most fun part of my day was sitting behind that set with Pam. Everything changed. It was fun.
We'll be right back.
Growing up as a little girl in Palm Beach County, I had an opportunity to see Ed Odell.
Hello, welcome to Montage. I'm Ed Odell.
And he was the host at that time of Montage.
The best way I can describe it is Montage was the local version of 60 Minutes.
And that was the first time I saw someone on television who looked like me. And that inspired me.
It was a 9-minute, mini documentary version of stories. There was not a topic that we didn't cover and cover it in amazing fashion, but you had to speak about the controversy.
You still have a good chance of hearing no vacancy.
WTVJ shaped the person that I am. I walked through the doors, and at 22 years old, I spent 33 years here. I was working with the pioneers of television, and I think it made a difference. One of our people went on the street as a homeless person.
To better understand the homeless, Catherine Kirk became one temporarily.
And that was great training to be able to do storytelling that was a little lengthier than you were able to do on a regular newscast.
But what will our air and water quality be like in the year 2000? Well, it all depends on who you talk to.
I was your quintessential Cub reporter. I would cover everything and anything. Miami is a great breeding ground for people who have network aspirations because local stories in Miami are really national stories.
The marine scientists here have another pet project.
I think in this day and age, people are missing community. And I think local news really provides a feeling of community.
The Grand Family Expo is coming to South Florida. Healthy living, fabulous food, plus a live appearance by the one and only Dr. Oz. Save the date. The Grand Family Expo presented by Memorial Healthcare System, March 31st at Sawgrass Mills.
Join Memorial Healthcare System for blood pressure and BMI screenings. Attend our physician panel discussion with Dr. Oz and enjoy arts and crafts fun with Joe DiMaggio Children's Hospital.
We'll see you at the Grand Family Expo, March 31st at Sawgrass Mills.
In the news business, if you can make it in Miami, you can make it anywhere.
There have been very tough times in South Florida where our community has been ripped apart.
On December 17th at 2 o'clock in the morning, Arthur McDuffie was fatally beaten here on this spot after a high-speed police chase.
1980, it was an incredible year. African Americans were still trying to find their way in the system. But it was a struggle. There was this man, an insurance salesman by the name of Arthur McDuffie, who was riding his motorcycle, stopped by police.
There was a high-speed chase when McDuffie, on a borrowed motorcycle, popped a wheelie on a Brownsville corner.
McDuffie crashed his motorcycle, but some of the wounds he sustained are not consistent with the accident.
Some substantial use of force was used at the scene after the chase.
What did he die from?
He died as a result of blunt head injuries with destruction of his underlying brain. He was beaten to death.
They beat my child to death. They beat him to death like a dog.
The four policemen, Sergeant Ira Diggs and officers Michael Watts, Alex Marrero, and Charles Viverka, have 47 complaints on their records. None were ever convicted of brutality. Now they face possible murder charges.
So it went to trial. The trial was transferred to Tampa.
It took 4 weeks to hear all the arguments and the evidence, but it took the jury less than 3 hours to reach the verdict.
As to manslaughter, as charged in count 2 of the information, not guilty.
I thought it was a joke when it started, and I don't think it should have ever gotten this far in the first place.
The truth came out, and we're going to have to live with the truth. If people can't live with the truth, then what are we going to live with?
I remember the day that the verdict came in, and I could hear the tone of voice of the people on the radios, and Miami just erupted. When the violence started, I remember C.T. Taylor was right in the middle of it, calling the shots and saying, "It's about to go down. Get everybody out here."
At the start of the demonstration, things were peaceful. But as the crowd grew, tempers began to flare. Bricks and bottles were thrown in the window of the Metro Justice Building, and several cars were overturned and burned. And as I said, order is restored in this particular area. However, there are many reports that uncontrolled activity is going on in other parts of Miami.
It can be an incredibly dangerous and an incredibly confusing time, you know, listening to both sides and trying your best to be objective as a reporter.
In the midst of the rioting, Mrs. McDuffie went on Channel 4 and pleaded for an end to the violence.
I think they should cut it out because too many people getting killed up, and I don't believe in that.
It was a horrible time. And then you had Mariel.
At sunset, they arrived, the first of perhaps 70 boats from Mariel Bay, the biggest crush so far in the Freedom Boat Lift of refugees.
It was a very difficult time for everybody living here. We had the Mariel Boat Lift. We were living a change in our community that was happening day by day.
And on the docks, the scene repeated daily in this month of refugee arrivals, magnified out of all proportion. By holding up and then overloading scores of boats, Castro has dumped thousands on the Key West docks and succeeded in overloading the immigration processing.
Look at the ragtag flotilla out at sea, and it's hard to believe that more than 60,000 refugees survived the 90-mile trip.
And there are enough boats left in Mariel Bay to repeat this scene daily for weeks to come.
We certainly went through some very, very turbulent times.
In this market, the thing that affects everybody is when a hurricane is approaching and when a hurricane hits. And that's when you see what you're made of as an organization.
No doubt, the station was amazing before, during, and after Hurricane Andrew.
It was life-changing. Life-changing for South Florida. The entire footprint changed.
You want to pin down where this eye is going to come ashore?
Well, it looks more and more like maybe even South Dade County. The center will be very close into the Cutler Ridge area, for instance, maybe the Homestead area.
The ocean has begun to invade the land over here. We are standing right next to where the pavement begins at Highway A1A.
Whatever dumb luck we had has ended here. The power just went out throughout all of this Hallandale area.
And it's going to be very, very bad all the way west, as far west as this county goes.
We're underneath Metro Rail. The winds are gusting outside our car up to 165 miles per hour.
I mean, that was a moment that not only was dramatic for me personally, because I was trapped in a car during the hurricane.
This is the one place, I guess, that if we have any sense of safety, it is here simply because we are underneath the Metro Rail.
When you see us move and you're watching us, we want you to move to your safe spot.
So we moved to this tiny little area that they now call the bunker.
I remember Bryant saying to us, listen, we really need to move because now we're getting into critical stage.
And what it was a storage closet that was encased in cement, and we decided to broadcast from there.
That was our safe room. So we had one light, we each had a microphone, and we had a telephone.
Surreal would be an understatement.
I remember listening on the radio, people calling in during that storm saying, you know, I'm losing my roof, my, windows are blowing in, what should I do? And at that point, we were making an impact.
Okay, and how long?
We have a long time to go, okay?
I remember the horror of people's voices calling in and saying they could feel their roof being ripped off. I get chills to this day just thinking about that call.
What we did better than every other station was stay on the air.
Because there was no internet, there was no social media, we were pretty much it.
We were fortunate in that our tower did not collapse during the storm, and our radar was on the whole night.
We had established a partnership with many radio stations, so they were able to listen to us during the storm. And we realized the gravity of what it is we were doing. We were saving lives that night. Brian took the lead in all of that.
He told us what was coming, what we should be prepared for.
Those are moments that are unforgettable to not just the TV station, but to the people that listened to the message and whose lives were potentially saved by that guidance.
And then when it passed, when we went outside, we didn't see much.
At the beginning, we thought we had dodged a bullet. But then as we proceeded to go further south down Dixie Highway and US 1, we started seeing the nature of the damage.
We understand right now we can perhaps get the first look at what's going on up in the air from Sky 4. Rob Pierce, are you with us right now?
Yes, I am. We have Buddy McKay on board the helicopter with us.
This can only be described as total devastation. Everybody was in shock, whether you knew it or not.
It impacted everybody. It impacted our community. It impacted our friends. It impacted our families. We have video here of people fighting for ice.
Very trying time to continue to work and function normally with your whole life being turned upside down.
There was a woman sitting outside with her 3 kids. The top half of her house was gone, and I started crying because I thought if this storm had been literally 7 miles further north, my house would have been in the same situation.
There's a moment during the aftermath of Hurricane Andrew where I came upon a small child in their front yard, and the parent had given the child a gun to sit there to protect what was left.
All looters will be shot on sightings.
And that's a real gun in your hand?
Yeah.
In the crisis and in the chaos and in the anarchy that followed, the reporting proved to be the one piece of sort of the community glue that ultimately brought everything back together.
That was emotional to cover. It was searing to cover. The memories are still there.
This is the responsibility of a local television station that takes its responsibility to heart, that we are here to serve our community.
It was one of the best examples of community service that a licensed TV station could do for a community.
Gianni Versace was shot and killed in front of his Ocean Drive mansion.
When Gianni Versace was murdered on the steps of his South Beach mansion, it was, first of all, unbelievable, and second of all, it was the kind of story where things were happening very quickly.
We were the first to break the story of the actual murder. It was the biggest story in the country at the time.
Tonight, fans are leaving flowers on Gianni Versace's front steps, replacing the blood left there earlier by a killer.
We were called on the radio, get over to the Versace mansion. We think Gianni Versace's just been murdered. And we were just a few blocks away. It happened so fast. We were at the crime scene at the Versace murder while they were taking his body, or the ambulance was on the way. So we were like right there, right when it happened. It was horrific.
Good evening, everyone. Tonight, the FBI confirmed what NBC6 first told you.
Police have already narrowed their search to just one man, Andrew Cunanan. The FBI thinks he's a serial killer.
Nobody's safe in this. And that's the point we have to get across.
There was a sense of almost terror in the community because nobody knew where this killer was.
The huge manhunt for Andrew Cunanan is over. He is dead.
We broke the story when Andrew Cunanan was in the houseboat in front of the entire world. We had the exclusive. One of the reasons we did is when all the other stations went off the air, Miami Beach was in gridlock. And I said, something's going on. I said, well, let's do the story as a traffic story, stay on the air.
The moment I knew Andrew Cunanan was in that houseboat was when the director of the FBI showed up in a tuxedo because he was called from a black tie event. And then I said, well, he wouldn't be here if it wasn't the real deal.
And for a while, nobody confirmed it. It's a very lonely moment when you're out there as an exclusive in front of the world and nobody's confirming it. And we were all sitting there, well, are we sure? And all of a sudden, UPI, AP, all the other stations came. And that was a great celebratory moment at the station of great journalism and the courage to go for the story and go for broke.
Definitely the station was at its best during Hurricane Andrew, during the Elian Gonzalez saga.
Thanksgiving Day 1999, 2 fishermen pull a barely conscious boy from the waters off the coast of Fort Lauderdale. The boy is found alone, clinging to an inner tube. The next day, November 26, INS grants his Miami relatives temporary custody. But on November 27th, from Cuba, Elian's father, Juan Miguel Gonzalez, demands his son be returned to the island.
The Elian Gonzalez story was one that almost ripped the newsroom apart.
I covered that one closely, and for me, it was personal. As a Cuban American, Elian Gonzalez, I knew the struggles that he and his family had gone through to get him here to this country, but then his father wanted him back. It was very difficult to try to be neutral, as I always try to be, no matter how I feel on the situation.
And so begins the international tug of war that played out for 7 months in the courts, on the streets, and in the capitals of the U.S. and Cuba.
We had journalists camped out outside of the house.
You got a great picture right there, little Elian.
And I remember breaking up several almost fistfights in the newsroom between employees who had difference of opinion about what should happen and when. It was not to say you cannot have emotion, but it was to know that emotion, but also to make sure that our coverage was separate from the emotion.
April 22nd, in a surprise and stealth move, federal agents descend on the little Havana home. In less than 2 minutes, they take the boy to reunite him with his father.
I begged him. I stood in front of I don't know how many guns, and I cried and I begged. We're not gonna do anything. We'll give you the boy. Don't let this happen like this.
Earlier this morning, federal agents in Miami began to reunite Elian Gonzalez with his father and uphold the rule of law.
There were riots in Miami when Elian was taken away. The police were trying to disperse crowds that were burning cars and burning tires, and we were right there trying to report on all this without getting hurt. And here comes the pepper spray, here comes the tear gas, and we were right in the middle of it.
Just as you said that, some tear gas was,
excuse me. All of your sinuses are draining, and you're just in agony, and you're on live television. But the story that really hit me the most emotionally just happened a year ago. And that was the Stoneman Douglas massacre.
We're getting reports of a shooting at Stoneman Douglas High School, and that is in Parkland.
School officials are confirming that there are multiple fatalities.
No story I've ever covered has had the emotional wallop of that story.
I live in Parkland. My neighbors were calling me on the phone that day, crying, screaming. My kids are locked in the school.
Seeing the devastation to families, seeing the devastation to a community, living it, being there, meeting these families, seeing their heartbreak. And it all comes down to 17 people losing their lives. They've lost children, they've lost spouses, they've lost loved ones. And you can't help, if you're a human, to feel empathy. It does change you as a reporter because it makes you even more sensitive to what you're saying on the air. I never mention the name of the shooter in any of my stories because I know that that really, really, really angers the people who are victims in this story.
But also just knowing the sensitivity that these are our people, we've got to handle this story differently.
Enough is enough is a chant that is going on right now here to take part in this March for Our Lives rally.
Who are we? And the leaders of the march, the ones holding the banner, are the same students who organized the entire effort today.
Those students saw an issue, they mobilized to get support for their issue, and they really set an example for the nation to follow. Whether you agree with their politics or not, whether you agree with their stance or not, what they did was extraordinary and certainly commendable.
What do we want? Change! When do we want it? Now!
Hello, I'm Jay Leno. On January 1st of this year, or next year, I'll be nitpicky, a cataclysmic event will take place right here in Miami. That is the day that NBC will become Channel 4.
I was sent here in the summer of 1988 by NBC to run a CBS station, to prepare the station for the big switch which took place on January 1, 1989.
Channel 4 was CBS. Channel 4 is now NBC. Channel 7 was NBC. They're now independent. Channel 6 was independent. That's now CBS.
We knew it was going to be confusing. We knew it was going to be challenging. One of the things I did was I personally contacted Bobby McFerrin.
You want the best from NBC. We got the shows you want to see on the 4 now. Be happy.
He let us use Don't Worry, Be Happy, his classic song, and we adapted it to the change.
Johnny, Susan, and Anna too. Cliff and Tony, who shows you?
We must have aired literally thousands of messages, and I was in the Freedom Tower at midnight on January 1, 1989, with thousands of people. We threw a huge party.
We are at the biggest New Year's Eve party in town to celebrate the big switch.
3,
2, 1, 1989!
It was just an amazing time.
Right now, all your favorite NBC shows are on Channel 4, right?
Duh.
Well, it's about to change.
I got a call from the head of NBC, and he said, Don, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is we're not selling the station. The bad news is we have to take your signal.
Thank you. NBC6, nice move.
Because NBC did a big business deal, we had to give up our signal, and we had what some people thought was a death penalty. Channel 6 in the market had a very poor signal and could not really do very much in terms of being competitive. So I brought everybody together in the station. I said, by God, we're not going to accept this. We're going to overcome it because we're WTVJ. We're different.
It's the same news that you've come to trust, and it's the same NBC shows that you've come to love, all in a new location.
People are still saying, I remember you from Channel 4, 6. What, huh? Where were you? Huh? What? And I say, I don't know where the hell I work. Just point me in the direction and give me the check. No.
On Sunday, WTVJ Channel 4 moves.
They were given a death sentence, and a lot of people would have given up, but they didn't.
Of course, we are all built on our identity. So what we had to ingrain in people is the fact that we are not changing. It's just the number on the dial that is.
Move on up with TVJ.
It was very difficult for me to make a decision to leave downtown Miami to come to Miramar.
We needed a new facility.
The decision was based on not where we were or where the audience was at the time. It was where was the audience going to be 10, 15, 20 years from now.
Moving to Miramar, I remember there were some members of the community who felt that we were abandoning Miami.
I drove up here just after we purchased the property, and I thought to myself, oh my God, what have we done? You know, there were cows in the pasture and there was nothing here.
But the fundamentals of WTVJ, just as strong in the new building as they were in the old building.
We took a leap of faith back in 2001, and when you see that we're right literally in the middle of our community, to the north and to the south, I feel a lot better about that decision today than I was back in 2000 when we bought the property.
TVJ is the history of South Florida.
It is a part of the fabric of Miami, and it has maintained that throughout its existence.
It is the best representation of South Florida and its community.
It's reflected by the folks that you see on the air, and just as importantly, all the people who you don't see on the air that are behind the scenes doing the work.
I had no idea that I was the first African American ever to do weather in this market. It was quite an honor. So many black folk had never seen a black person doing weather here locally.
Television news it has been critical, it is critical, and it's always going to be critical to serve the community, particularly in difficult times.
I actually think local news is more important today than it has ever been. You can have all the opinions you want, but you can't have an opinion if you don't know the facts. And so the facts begin right here on WTVJ.
You're here to serve the community. That's the best business model you can have.
And we serve this community day in and day out, from day one, in black and white and in color, in video and in high definition.
To be able to create change because of a story that you've told, that'll never go away.
Hopefully we continue with this great storytelling, because that never changes.
Legacy is only as good as the next story you do. What's important is that we continue to move forward, knowing what our legacy is, but continuing to strive for excellence and getting things right and showing people the whole picture.
I think the regular broadcast that local news outlets provide is really just half of what they're able to do for a community, and I think WTVJ has really led the way.
WTVJ has made a difference in the 70 years by being rooted in this community and covering the stories that are important.
And what better thing to come into work every day to inform, empower, and inspire your community and connect to your community and be a force to make it better?
I mean, one of the things I did here that I loved the most was when I worked with Ari and we did Brag About Your School, and that was one way that we could say, hey, look at all these great things that are going on in our schools you should be proud of, because this is the future.
Our effort to showcase what's good in our schools and what's good with our youth, I think, has a tremendous positive impact to remind people that not everything is bad out there. It's all about kids striving to be their best and kids setting examples for other kids and kids inspiring other kids, which we show every week in our Swag on 6 series.
The Women of Tomorrow Mentor and Scholarship Program was born here at WTVJ 21 years ago. It was through the power of this television station that it got going.
Impact has made a big difference in my life, and I hope in the community that we serve. If I can impact them, one viewer, then I think I've succeeded in doing my job.
You know that there's some out there that they're looking for a voice. They're looking for help. We have NBC6 Responds in order to help folks out there. We did that with Voices, and even though it may be geared to the Black community and the disenfranchised, to hear people come up to you and say, thank you for what you're doing for our community, there's nothing bigger, as far as a compliment you can get. WTVJ, I mean this, has changed my life.
WTVJ for me has really been everything. It is my home. It has been my home for over a quarter of a century.
It's my life. This place is my life.
You get here and you feel this real sense of family.
This job allows me to be part of history, that I record history.
70 years. What other station in that market has that? We have that.
It means something to be from WTVJ. It means something to have come through NBC6.
It's a dream, and you don't realize until you're done what a dream it was.
I feel very proud that I'm able to represent this community, the community that I love, that I embrace, and that I get the chance every day to come and to broadcast for them and to make a difference in their lives. For me, that's success.
WTVJ's 70 Years of Making a Difference is sponsored by FPL.